The story of water begins as a tiny drop. It begins up on a forested hillside or on a snowy mountain peak. Gravity pulls it downward until it joins with other droplets on its way to the sea. The story of water and how it makes this journey is described in Psalm 104. The psalmist prays, "You make springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills, giving drink to every wild animal. From your lofty abode, you water the mountains." The story of water is often repeated here in San Jose, California. It comes from groundwater. It comes from the Delta. It comes rushing down from the Santa Cruz mountains. Living in the Bay Area, we all have a vested interest in keeping the waters flowing.
If we look at the history of the Guadalupe River in general, prior to probably the 1920s or something like that, there was a natural stream here, a natural riparian corridor. It would flood in the winter and then gradually go dry during the summer season. And then, as the area grew and somebody came out of here and created a quarry and basically destroyed all the habitat that existed, just taking gravel out of the gravel deposits that occurred here. And so it looked pretty bad till about the 1950s. We had a dam here. This dam dates back to the 1930s. And so we would, so there was really no access for fish to get anywhere past here because we blocked it with a dam. And also the habitat, the riparian habitat was virtually destroyed. Meanwhile, we've armored the channel banks and replanted vegetation in the channel to provide some of the original habitat value that existed here.
These trees?
Right.
All through here.
And what happened when the people went in to develop water supplies in the watersheds was there wasn't a real awareness of the environmental function of the water supply. So we went in, we built these dams, and that gave us the power to dry up these streams whenever we wanted to. We had a valve. We could capture all the water that came down, and we had complete control over the streams. And there used to be some fisheries here, salmon fisheries, native salmon runs.
The story of water is a story of percolating ponds, pumping plants, aqueducts, fish ladders, wastewater recycling plants, and reservoirs. But in the end, we have to remember the story of water always begins with a single drop. Should we care about this story? Should people of faith take an active role in caring where their water comes from and where it is going?
The plant is such a special and unique operation. We make sure that everything that the community puts down the drain is treated in a manner that doesn't damage the wildlife and the local habitats.
Right.
It's a pretty important job. I mean, most people don't think about whether or not when they flush the toilet or turn on the tap, they assume that the water will go away and leave their house. And we work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to make sure you have that confidence and that there's no disruption to your service and or to the wildlife. Well, the less water we get and the less solid material we get, the better. So don't put one tissue in the toilet and flush it. That would be a big help. Don't flush baby wipes. They're a big problem for us as well. They get caught up in the machinery and we have to extract them. And you really think about this as whatever you do in your house eventually winds up in the bay.
The story of water is a story of what flows downstream. It is a story of life and death. It is also a matter of faith.
For starters, everybody who cares about survival should care about water, because it's the one resource that there's no substitute for. I mean, we talk about an oil shortage, but there are other fuels available and other raw materials available that you can substitute for oil. There's not a whole lot you can substitute for water if you want to irrigate your crops, or even if you want something to drink. And I have heard it suggested that beer is a substitute for water, but I have it on good authority that it does take water to make beer. So no matter how you slice it, we need water. So just from a human standpoint, it's important. But within the faith community, we have taken on ourselves, if you will, an ethical mandate to care about others. And water is one of those few resources that we, at least in this country, believe is a common good. In fact, up until within the last 100 years ago, it was addressed specifically as a public good and was not owned in any real sense. Of course, in the last couple of 100 years, property rights have entered into the picture, and water in many ways is commodity. Water rights are owned, which sets up its own unique sets of problems. I think the main point, though, is that water is something that everybody needs. If we care about the less fortunate among us, one of the few things we can do to help ensure their comfort, if not their survival, is to have fresh, clean water available for everybody at a reasonable cost. The more pollution we put into the water, the more difficult it's going to be to do that. You've seen that in many third world countries, where the only clean water that's available is available from the private sector, and they've had water riots as a result. But then there's another faith-based reason, and I think that's just simply respect for the created world. In the Jewish tradition, we're told that humans were created in the image of God, but that we're not God, we're creatures of God. And the rest of the world has that relationship also. That is, this world around us is created. So we have that in common, and as created beings, there's a certain underlying respect, I think, that we're asked to provide.
In the book of Job, God challenges Job's knowledge of things he can never know. God asks Job, "Who cut the channel for the torrents of rain to flow? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds so that a flood of waters may cover you? Has the rain a father, or who has begotten the drops of dew?" We certainly will not be able to answer all the questions that God asks of Job, and we will not be able to answer all the questions we have about water, this precious renewable resource. One thing we do know is that we need water to live. And so it behooves us as people of faith to practice conservation, to practice ways of caring for this great resource that God has given us. So let's try to value every drop.